What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we are back with another Detroit Lions breakdown video. And today, we're going to be diving a little bit deeper into this receiver discussion and specifically talking about a player that may be one of the most overlooked players heading into the season. So let's get it started. Welcome, everybody, to another video. Glad you guys are here. And yes, we're back with another breakdown video for the Lions. Now, this one, again, isn't going to be exactly the same as some of our specific prospect breakdown videos, but there will be similarities to that. There will be some similar things that we do. We'll show some clips. We'll talk about some different traits for this specific player, but I wanted to expand this discussion. This feels like a great point to pick up where we left off when we spoke about Jameson Williams and him being in line for his breakout season this upcoming season and where he needs to improve. And now we're continuing to get the quotes from the Lions. We see the clips from minicamp. We see Jameson Williams. It makes a ton of sense that there is a clear opportunity for Jameson Williams to just become that guy within this Lions offense. And one word that we're going to use throughout this show, probably a lot later, but it's clarity. Now, there's not necessarily clarity in the sense that we know exactly what everybody brings to the table. There's a lot of unknowns there. But where the Lions do have clarity, specifically in this receiver room, is the opportunities to step into specific large roles within this offense for guys like Jameson Williams are right there for the taking. It's not someone standing in his way that feels kind of awkward, like how is he going to get his snaps, then this guy's also going to get his snaps. Like, the opportunity is right there. We know where guys can plug in and play their big roles. It's just about doing it. It's just about actually executing that. So there is clarity in that sense. And I think that makes this video make a lot of sense today, because the guy that we're going to be talking about is a guy that really I feel like we haven't given much discussion to whatsoever, going back to his extension. And this was a guy that got an extension while he was under contract with the Lions. He's now under contract through 2025. And when you're looking at this receiver room, most of our guys are not under contract beyond the season unless they're under a rookie deal outside of now Amon-Ra St. Brown. Just don't seem to talk about him very much, and that is Kalif Raymond. And today I thought it'd be a good opportunity to dive into what Kalif Raymond can bring to the table for the Lions, but also how it creates clarity within this Lions offense and this receiver room of what the expectations are, but where the opportunities also lie. Now, I'm going to go a little out of order here because it just feels right to start with this. So I'm going to pull this back a little bit. Let's go back to the LA Rams days when Jared Goff was with the Rams. We're going to go 2018, 2019. Now, I've definitely referenced these years many times before, so you may know where I'm going with this, okay? Well, also, Brad Holmes was there as well. But I think that this is a great starting point to just look at how the Lions have kind of built out this offense and what we're seeing take place here with how Brad Holmes is investing and putting together this Lions offense and the pieces that he's putting around now his quarterback that has officially been paid. Congratulations, Jared Goff. Well deserved. Happy to see it. But now it's about, okay, building around this guy now that he's been paid, which he's been paid over the last couple of years. So I don't want to make it sound like, oh, he's finally getting paid. How's it going to work now? He was getting paid a lot last year. Proved a lot of people wrong on a high cap hit that you can win with the guy on a high cap hit. That's not what this is for, though. The point is he's getting paid now. He's your guy for sure going forward. We know that. He's been our guy. But now it's about building around that. And I think what we've seen from Brad Holmes is some real experience with Jared Goff, understanding exactly how he wants to put this thing together and having a really good sense of if we have these pieces, Goff will be successful. If we don't have these pieces, Goff can still be successful. And I think that's what we're kind of seeing take place. So I go back to 2018, and I'm going to use this comparison to say that these guys are the same, or I'm expecting this kind of season out of Kalif Raymond. But I do think that's interesting just in terms of the build. I think a lot of times we think about vertical threats. We talk about Jameson Williams, a little bit of Antoine Green, and I always compare him to guys like Brandin Cooks because, like, hey, that was a vertical threat with the LA Rams. But in this terms of build, like the way that he's put together, Kalif Raymond, a lot of similarities there in terms of build, in terms of testing scores coming out for the draft. This, obviously, Kalif Raymond undrafted out of Holy Cross, a little bit different from Brandin Cooks, but there's a lot of similarities there just in terms of how they are built. And also some of the ways that Kalif Raymond wins within this offense, similar to how Brandin Cooks won with the LA Rams. I think that he'll necessarily have the diversity that Brandin Cooks had within that offense at its peak. I don't think he'll necessarily be able to put up those kind of numbers in this offense unless something crazy happened. I don't think that will be the case. And I think Brandin Cooks in some areas is just a deeper player. Like, he does certain things just better than Kalif Raymond. We'll talk about that a little bit more. But I start here first because going back to the first year Brad Holmes was here, and the Lions decided, hey, in a receiver room that's completely depleted, and it was, and then obviously we got Josh Reynolds throughout the year, helped a ton, we needed it. They went offensive line with their top pick. Now, it could be just as simple as, hey, they thought he was the best player, just that simple. But they did go offensive line with that pick, and they waited till round 4 to eventually get the receiver and Amon-Ra St. Brown. We fast forward to this offseason, And we're coming in, and it's hard to distinguish the needs because the Lions are a well-built roster, and it's like, man, they kind of don't necessarily need anything. They feel pretty good everywhere. But I personally had receiver very high. Maybe no one else did. I had it very high on the list. I thought, man, if there is a place that feels like a need just because of where the roster's at, it's probably going to be receiver for the Lions because Josh Reynolds is not coming back. And for the Lions, they said, no, we're going to draft 0 receivers. Now, they brought in some UDFAs that I like. They brought in some other free agents like Traquan Smith, Fountain, guys that I think are interesting. But instead of drafting a receiver, which could have like made it so, okay, you know that guy's making the roster, like give you a little bit more of that sense. Instead, the Lions said, let's draft 2 offensive linemen. They took 2 offensive linemen. They traded a future third to get an offensive lineman that's a project. Then they also drafted Christian Mahogany at the end of the draft. So they drafted 2 offensive linemen instead. So this has continued to be kind of the way that Brad Holmes put this together, is clearly valuing we have to be able to protect Goff. That's first and foremost. You protect him, he's going to have a chance. That goes away. Doesn't really matter what you have on the outside. I think we have a great representation of this just by looking back at those years of the LA Rams. Now, different circumstances across the board. And a lot of, again, cap hits are set up by timing. When is this guy getting paid? When does his cap number rise? Is there flexibility? Can we drop it? It's all about timing within working kind of the salary cap number. Rookie deals versus non-rookie deals. That being said, though, if you go back to the LA Rams 2018 when they were 13-3 and Brandin Cooks cooked within that offense, he was massive. Him and Robert Woods, 80 receptions, 1,200 yards. He was awesome within that offense. And then you moved to 2019 where things just completely fell apart. 32 receptions, just over 500 yards receiving. Things just fell apart. They went 9-7 that season. You ask yourself, what happened? Big thing for me offensively, and again, there's a lot of factors to this, their offensive line fell apart. All right, this was the 31st ranked offensive line that season by Pro Football Focus. It fell apart. They had some injuries, but that was the biggest thing. Even though Goff's time to throw sped up that season, his pressure weight also went up that season. And you could also say we saw this in 2021 when Taylor Decker was out. It changed everything. Our offense just looked completely different when you didn't have time in the pocket. So we saw that just basically having the offensive line fall apart, even though you had all these weapons, the offense as well essentially just fell apart. They also lost kind of their run game a little bit as well. But that was the big difference. Then you also start to look at that receiver room and the weapons that they had, and you got to the point where it almost felt like, in a way, it was like, okay, maybe we're just doing too much here. And they ultimately had to trade away Brandin Cooks. So they went from signing him to a 5-year, $80 million deal to trading him away to the Houston Texans and having to eat some pretty big dead cap after making that trade. Yet, you look at the receiver room, and the year before they had Cooper Kupp, but Cooper Kupp had only played in 8 games, so he wasn't really that dude within the offense. He had 40 receptions in 2018, and leading the way instead was Robert Woods, and it was Brandin Cooks in their big roles. Also in 2019, had an explosion of Tyler Higbee offensively. He became a massive part of that offense, and all of a sudden, now not only has your offensive line fallen apart, the intended air yards has also dropped for Jared Goff, because now he's getting less time in the pocket. He's getting the ball out quicker, but his pressure rate's still going up. You also have the aspect of, you also had just a ton of weapons. The point where when the trade was made, one of the points that was brought up is that the LA Rams has shown even more success out of 12 personnel, but when you put 2 tight ends on the field, now all of a sudden this team that was really known for the 11 personnel, meaning 3 receivers on the field, all of a sudden having more success out of 12 personnel, limits your receivers to now only 2 on the field. Now you had a room of Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods, and Brandin Cooks. Someone's got to be on the sideline there. So now you just had so many weapons to the point where it's like, maybe we just have too much at this position. So instead of maybe having more investments on the offensive line where it could have necessarily, like with injuries popping up, maybe that helps you. Instead, you get to the point where you have so many weapons, the offensive line falls apart, but you can't actually use every single weapon because now the offensive line's pulling back. It actually hurts the weapons around you, and now you just have too much to the point where it almost feels like it's overcrowded, and all of a sudden a guy that you're paying big money, at the time you weren't paying Cooper Kupp, they had a lot of different financial situations, they had the Jalen Ramsey edition as well, we're in a different spot in a lot of different ways. We could have afforded a receiver for a 1-year deal, and we can do that still going forward. They did clear cap space, and they just had a lot of pieces at one position. And now, instead, what we saw for the Lions this season, instead of just drafting a receiver in this year's draft, they went out and actually drafted a guy that's going to transition to running back, who I believe has a really strong pass game impact. If you go check out that video, one of my highest grades, definitely go check that out. And I think it also opens up the flexibility of a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs, who the Lions are talking about, again, and you see it, I didn't realize how much this was until now I'm actually looking for it. The amount of games that he's actually lining up at receiver, almost every game that I went through, at least once Jahmyr Gibbs lined up at receiver and running receiver routes. Like, that's that's a huge impact again. I thought it would be massive coming out of the draft. Saw it less this past season statistically, but you do see it if you just look at the way that he lines up. He does line at receiver.
Plus, when we're talking about flexibility, I feel like I always often overlook like the tight end position, where games like at Chicago, where the Lions ran a lot of 13 personnel, meaning 3 tight ends on the field, 1 running back on the field. That changes everything as well. Lions paid Rock Wright. Obviously, we're going to have Laporta and James Mitchell as well with Shane Zylstra potentially. That's a loaded tight end room as well, so we also have to take that into account.
Instead of actually going with a guy that's a pure receiver, went with another guy that can make plays out the backfield, win level 1, potentially show some flexibility, but he's going to be transitioned to the running back position. You just start right there with the clarity that I think that Brad Holmes has in a way kind of created within this room. Again, it doesn't mean they can't add somebody to this if someone becomes available that they really like, they're financially in a spot where they can do it. But the clarity is there in this sense. Who did we not see in the playoffs this past year? Well, we didn't see Donovan Peoples-Jones, who the Lions traded for him. When they traded for him, they said it was going to be for depth. They re-signed him after only seeing really just flashes at most during the regular season. You could also look at what he did in the past. The clarity the Lions have created is, to me, this. You know who the number 1 is? He's going to eat up the receptions. That's Amon-Ra St. Brown. He's the number 1, inside, outside. He's that guy. He's kind of like the Cooper Kupp, right? That's what it feels like with the other Rams, because when Cooper Kupp emerged, Brandin Cooks kind of pulled back within that offense. He is that guy for us. Then it's, hopefully, Jameson Williams. He's going to be that number 2. Now, different stylistically than Robert Woods and maybe even Brandin Cooks in some ways. There's different stylistically, different build, but he's going to be that number 2. That's the vision. He's the guy that dictates coverage. He's the guy that's going to have this breakout season. The path is clear for him to become that guy, and it has always been that way, right? Remember the first year when we drafted James Williams, it was DJ Chark, and then it was Josh Reynolds. He had really a mix. It was like, okay, who's going to get on the field here? It's like, how do we find spots for all 3 of these guys? At the end of the season, it was hard to find getting all of these guys on the field. That clarity is there. Hey, J-Mo, this is your role to step into. We used a first-round pick on you. We're going to give you that opportunity. We believed in you, and that's one thing Brad has done is like, hey, if he buys into the guy, he's not just going to put someone on top of that player because we haven't seen it yet. If he believes that it's there, he's going to give you an opportunity to step into that role. And now the receiver 3, you could say is Sam Laporta, you could say is Jahmyr Gibbs, but it's also the aspect of now it's a kind of a mash of different skill sets. Donovan Peoples-Jones, who's hopefully going to bring some of that element of what Josh Reynolds brought to the table. It's Kalif Raymond. It's Antoine Grain, just in different skill sets. And we'll talk about him more specifically in comparison to Josh Reynolds. But the clarity is there for the Lions. Where are the targets going to go? If all goes right, the vision is, hey, we paid St. Brown. Down the road, we'll pay James Williams, even though he's still under his rookie deal. Down the road, we'll pay Jameson Williams. And then the offensive line, as of now, where you've invested heavily, meaning that the Lions have the 6th highest cap hit this season to the offensive line versus 26th highest to the receiver room. Obviously, that's going to change because St. Brown's cap number really hasn't kicked in yet. Once it does, it's going to change everything. But that, if you compare it to, say, the LA Rams, for example, who in 2019 were spending $31 million on their offensive line versus $26 million, which was the 6th highest at receiver in 2019. And again, that thing just kind of fell apart. So instead, the Lions are on the opposite path, which is following more so offensive line first. Now, that may change in terms of spending because when St. Brown gets paid, that's going to change a little bit. But then the offset, in a perfect world, will be, hey, you're no longer now paying these guards like Kevin Zeitler. Now, all of a sudden, it becomes maybe it's the Mahoganies, maybe it's the Manus that become those guys, and maybe Graham Glasgow goes to center, or maybe you draft a new center.
If not Manu playing tackle, I think there's a world in which potentially Colby Sorstel could play tackle once again, like we saw a little bit last year, and maybe that pushes Sewell and finds a replacement at tackle.
And then you're paying Penei Sewell. He's the one guy that's getting paid. Maybe at that point, that's when you give your high investment to a potential new left tackle, right? Or maybe Taylor Decker just gets re-signed on that. So you can see the clarity for not only the vision right now and like where the opportunities are, but it's also clarity in the sense that the long-term goal is very clear. It's easy path to follow of how this thing is going to look over the next few seasons if everything goes right and these guys live up to what they believe they can be. Instead of necessarily doing it through trade, like you could say the LA Rams did, the Lions instead just did it through the draft with Jameson Williams. I don't want to go too specifically into names to be like, this guy's going to get re-signed and this is the future, because there's a lot of these guys that just still need to prove it. Like, they're going to have their opportunities. They need to prove it, but that's a key part, and we'll talk about that. However, I think if you just ask yourself how the Lions are going to handle this situation, which in a lot of ways is kind of an unknown because this is the first time we're going to see a Brad Holmes draft class become free agents, and he's going to have to make decisions on his guys. He knows he's told us the whole time the plan is to draft, develop, re-sign his guys, and that sounds great, but man, you can't re-sign everybody, especially with how well they draft. So many of these guys are performing well. It's like, well, we can't pay everybody, and that comes back to the timing aspect, but I think what it's going to look like, and this is just a prediction, it's going to look very similar to what we saw this offseason in free agency, which is, and I guess we've seen it for a couple of years, the Lions are going to be stingy in terms of who are they going to give big money to? The guys that have earned the big money. It's clear, there's no questions. Amon-Ra St. Brown, Penei Sewell, they're going to get big money. They've earned it already. And just be solid for the Lions and maybe not show necessarily improvement through years and kind of like you've stalled out to a point where you're like, yeah, you're a solid player, but we're going to pay you really good money because it's an extension and the salary cap's going up. It won't be just enough. And I think here's the key for that for the Lions. The reason that works is because the Lions are giving their guys opportunities. Like if we just go through the Lions draft classes, just go through the, going back to 2021, go each year. How many of those guys haven't gotten an opportunity season after season after season to prove themselves? Now, I'd go back to 2021 and say, man, I'd like to see some more Jamar Jefferson personally. But if you do look at that entire draft class, I mean, even Jamar Jefferson sticks around. They've all gotten opportunities. Like Levi, where maybe it was like last year, we're saying, well, okay, maybe you move off him. Like you could have just got off the guy, or you could have added someone and just put him right in front of the player. And you could have been like, I don't really know where the Levi role is, and you move on. But the Lions haven't done that because they believe in their draft picks, they believe in their investments, and they believe that those are going to become the guys. Similar to this one situation here with Jameson Williams, and we'll talk more later in this video about why Kalif Raymond is actually the perfect free agent addition to the receiver room for the Lions, or someone to extend, because he allows that opportunity to be created but adds tons of flexibility. We'll talk about that in comparison to a guy like Josh Reynolds, but it's similar to what the Lions do really with every draft pick. You're going to get an opportunity and you're going to stick around. You're going to continue to get those opportunities because we believe in you. There's a reason that we invested in you. We can kind of see that with like guys like Mosley, Donovan Peoples-Jones, especially Mosley, because we didn't see him at all. They re-signed him after having signed him, but they didn't see anything. It was simply based on like the way they scouted him as a free agent. They liked him enough to bring him back again after seeing nothing coming off an injury. That being said, if you just go through each draft class 2021, all of these guys are getting opportunities to play. Year after year after year, they're getting opportunities to prove themselves. 2022, you're getting opportunities to prove yourself. All of those players in that draft class. I mean, you think about that first draft, Derek Barnes, like this offseason, could the Lions have went out? They had the money. If they would have went outside a guy that I liked, Andrew Van Ginkel. And then it was like, okay, even if they keep around James Houston, who continues to get opportunity, right? It's right there for him. James Houston has a role. But if they could have signed a guy like that, said, you know what, Derek Barnes, we like you. We don't necessarily love you necessarily at that point. Maybe we don't love you there. We feel like you could get a little potential upgrade. We'll give a bigger deal to this guy. And then it's like, well, what do we do exactly with Derek Barnes? Because he showed that he could play that Sam role a little bit there. And then with James Houston, it's like, how does this all work out? Now you might have an odd man out. Lions didn't do that. They said, no, we believe in those guys. He started to find a role. He's picked up. He's gotten better and better. He's continued to improve. We're going to leave that door open for you to play. You're going to continue to improve within this team. And because the Lions have done that year after year, when that time comes to become a free agent and your 4 years are up, it shouldn't be too much of an issue of, outside of being injured like every single season, well, the guy didn't really have a chance to prove himself, so we don't really know because we kind of moved off it quick, or we put this guy in front of him and he'll never get a chance to play. The one guy you could try to point to there is like Broderick Martin, because Broderick Martin now behind DJ Reader. Broderick Martin did play a little bit last year, but they expected it was going to be developmental. But even still, like next season, he's going to rotate. It's not like Reader is going to play every single play when he's out there. He should be ready by training camp, it sounds like. At some point during training camp, it sounds like. The year after that, even if Reader sticks around, the Lions keep him through the second year of his deal. Again, you could keep Broderick Martin's going to mix in. He'll probably see an expanded role, but he's going to have an opportunity. And the Lions, because they continue to allow that opportunity to take place, I don't think it's going to be extremely difficult for them to make those tough decisions. It'll be, hey, did the guy improve? Did he actually earn this money? And if it's like, kind of here and there, they're not going to pay the guy. That's my assumption. They'll just be like, okay, we're not going to pay him. We'll take another draft pick. We'll draft the position again, and we'll go out there in free agency. We'll sign someone that can kind of like fill in, plug a hole for us there. We'll continue to follow this process. They're just going to have to become very stingy, and it's going to make it very difficult. Like you got to play at this level. Now the floor has raised, as the Lions say, and I think over the years we've seen that. I mean, you go back to the T.J. Hockenson trade, and specifically to this video when they trade away T.J. Hockenson. Obviously, the salary cap was a part of that. We knew he was going to get paid big money, and he was good with the Lions. I don't think he was great with the Lions necessarily. He was good with the Lions. So I think that was just a big thing in general. But not even go down that path. Once he was traded away, it was Dan Campbell who specifically spoke on, had to feel good about more touches going to other positions because they knew how much production T.J. Hockenson brought at the time. And he felt good with that between Kalif, Josh Reynolds. He started naming receivers. Then he named running backs getting extra touches. Then the other tight ends, of course. So that's something that we're also seeing now where the Lions also aren't so into like, hey, okay, wow, we lost Josh Reynolds. We have to get a receiver to replace that directly. Instead, they have been open to saying, well, the running backs can do it too. Like that's part of their game. The tight end, we'll be adaptable offensively. We don't have to play the same offense every year. We'll play a little bit different personnel schematically. We'll change up. We'll get the best players on the field. If that's two tight ends and two backs, the best players will be on the field, and that's how we'll do it. But I think that's what we're seeing with a guy like Jameson now, just in one specific picture. Is the opportunity's there, and because the Lions believe in him, we saw improvement last year. They're leaving that opportunity, the door open, to say, go take it, man. Go take it. Prove yourself for the next couple seasons. We'll pay you your money if you earn that big money, and we'll go from there.
The one that you could argue really didn't get a huge opportunity was Chase Lucas, which was always he played in the preseason, but really didn't get much of a chance in the regular season. But I think also letting him go was him getting an opportunity with San Fran elsewhere after loading up on cornerback this offseason. I think the most interesting one, though, on this list is Malcolm Rodriguez. And the willingness to say, okay, we have other linebackers stepping into larger roles. What about trying fullback? And now the Lions no longer having Jason Cabinda. I think he could be the fullback this season. Being willing to be open to finding a way to give these guys opportunities. It also, to me, in a way, should lower the risk of we're not necessarily just signing you on projection. We've seen it. We've given you that chance. It shouldn't be a projection because you draft so well, it works.
And we'll just have to be stingy elsewhere. But the Lions are making it simple, I think, in that case. And I think that's what's going to lead to long-term successes because they draft so well. This would all fall apart if you didn't draft well. If you didn't draft well, love what Lions do in free agency. I absolutely love it. But you're not necessarily looking for like the big difference makers in free agency consistently, though I think they found some this year, specifically in guys like DJ Reader and Carlton Davis through a trade. But because they're not necessarily giving out all those huge deals to guys that have already proven it, if you couldn't draft, leaving these guys, keeping these guys around to improve and, continue to have that opportunity and believing in your coaching staff to develop these guys, things would probably fall apart pretty quickly because it'd be like, yeah, this is not going anywhere. Our team is just getting worse. Instead, because the Lions have drafted so well and their coaches are getting out of them and they invest so heavily in the coaching staff, and now you have the best defensive line coach in football in Williams, now all of a sudden it makes this possible what the Lions are doing from a long-term approach. And again, to continue back, we're going to get to it. Kalif Raymond is actually the perfect receiver as an extension for leaving that opportunity, but also still adding a ton of value to the Lions. So I went back and I watched Kalif Raymond from the last 3 seasons, specifically the past 2 seasons, not as much 2021 because I didn't get the all-22 version of that, but I did go back and I watched from the last 2 seasons. Kalif Raymond went through multiple games just to get a sense of what he's brought to the table, whether or not he's actually getting the football. Because early with Kalif Raymond, I had thought that, man, this is easily the best separator Lions have. Just pure separator receiver, he was the best one. I think at this point, that's Amon-Ra St. Brown, clearly. But Kalif Raymond, I always thought was a big-time separator, and that opinion really hasn't necessarily changed. Now, in terms of the ways that he separates best, I think I have a better sense of that, what route tree that fits, and maybe that continues to expand because I do think Kalif's gotten better. Number one, just in terms of catching the football in general, right? 3 drops 2021. Last 2 seasons, according to PFF, he's had 1 combined. Now, he hasn't always pulled the ball down in all these contested situations, but in terms of just pure, focus drops, those have pulled back specifically for Kalif Raymond. I think he's gotten better in certain areas within this Lions offense. He's also got an opportunity here that he really didn't get before he got to the Lions. Then statistically speaking, when you see his numbers in terms of just pass rating when targeted, it's really strong over the past 3 seasons with Jared Goff. Usually when the ball is thrown his direction, good things are going to happen is what that means. Now, a sample size isn't always massive, but when the ball usually goes his way, usually good things are going to happen. We know that he lacks a little bit of radius, but it's still a very high catch rate when the ball is thrown his way. I think really the biggest question that can be brought up when we talk about Kalif Raymond, and obviously this is a two-way street, so it's not perfectly fair because we did hear Brad say that this was the guy that they wanted back, which was Josh Reynolds, but in just terms of getting paid, Kalif Raymond was extended a deal that runs through 2025, and it's $5.25 million per season, with his cap hit jumping this next season in 2025. So 2 years, $10.5 million was his extension. Josh Reynolds is actually making less than that on his new deal with the Denver Broncos, which even speaks to it a little bit more because Kalif Raymond, when he got paid, the salary cap obviously was a year out, so it was a whole different salary cap situation as well. So you kind of expect maybe Josh's to be higher, but it's not. Two-way street, so it's not necessarily fair to do that, but I think that's the one argument that can be made here, maybe against Kalif Raymond, based on where the Lions are at situationally right now. However, when we start to kind of dive into Kalif Raymond, we go through some of the notes, some of the things that I saw when watching the player. I think going back to that Brandin Cooks point, the areas that he was most successful within that LA Rams offense in terms of the route tree that he had the most success is a lot of ways when you watch Kalif Raymond, you see a lot of the same kind of success. And you look at it passer rating wise, his 3 highest pass ratings when targeted in 2018 from Jared Goff was on post routes, corner routes, and screen routes. All of those routes, we know that Kalif Raymond has been huge on. Well, number one, I'm going to show you a lot of clips. He is a dynamic post route runner. Level 3 post routes, he consistently separates. Now, he may not always have the catch radius where it's easy to connect on those, but he separates consistently vertically over the top. Which I think, again, back to the point of making the argument for the Kalif Raymond versus Josh Reynolds, where he adds a lot of benefit to me. Flexibility in the sense of if you didn't have St. Brown for a game, he could kick in at slot and you'd be fine. He can handle slot responsibilities perfectly fine. He has the quickness to do it. He has the skill set. He has the reactive hands, and he has some run after catch, toughness. He's a big-time blocker, like a big-time blocker, and he's reliable with the football. So he can step into that role. But he also brings that vertical element where if you don't have Jameson for a game, you still get that vertical speed, which was something the Lions have actually pointed to in the past. Without Jamo, we'll kind of just use Kalif in that role. Plus, he's also a punt returner who's been a really good punt returner for the Lions. And you could also argue that he's shown growth really every season, even though this past year, again, it was kind of a little bit of a step back statistically, and we didn't see him in the playoffs either. But he has shown, I think, growth just in general since he's gotten here with the Lions. So I do think there's strong arguments to say that it makes sense that the Lions paid Kalif Raymond. Kind of put a bow on the whole Brandin Cooks thing. 39.5% of his targets with Jared Goff were 20-plus air yards. Now, that didn't mean that everything was a shot play because it wasn't. I say shot play in terms of you're thinking like a 7-step drop heave. There was a few of those, but they weren't all of them. Majority of them were the quick play action. Goff hits his back foot, and it's a post route. It's just going to hit 20 yards in the air. It was a deep out route and a lot, or comeback route, or a deep curl in a lot of the areas that you see Kalif Raymond. And actually, if you look at Kalif Raymond again, statistically speaking here, and you look at Kalif Raymond, according to PFF, his success on 20-plus yard passes, for example, this past season, he had 5 receptions on those throws, with, again, a stat line that dropped. He only had 35 receptions. 5 receptions on 7 targets for 145 yards on those throws, and that was tied for 49th in terms of receptions, so 20-plus yard passes. You go back just a year, he had 6 receptions on 11 targets for 210 yards, no touchdowns, but that was tied for 30th in receptions in 2022 and 31st for yards in 2022 for 20-plus yard receptions. So to keep that in mind, Kalif's actually been very successful on those types of throws as well. We've just seen a much smaller sample size. We've seen some of the big throws. We've seen some of the long setups, the Green Bay Packers, the heave that he had to Kalif Raymond. We've seen a few of those. But again, we've seen a lot of the fast motion, deep comeback route, bam, 25 yards. We've seen the deep out routes, right? We've seen the deep dig routes late in the game when teams go 2 deep safeties. We've seen a lot of those, some similar things to what we also saw with Brandin Cooks. So just to kind of put some more numbers to that. Kalif Raymond, the other thing that I always look for again is beating man coverage. And I think that Sam Laporta last year, I thought when we drafted him, the difference that he was going to have for offense, that he was going to be able to beat man coverage. And I think he proved that last year you could do it. St. Brown is probably our best in that area. You lose Josh Reynolds, you lose some of that because he's pretty good in that spot, statistically speaking. Kalif Raymond has that ability. That's one area that I think must be brought up because he's good here. He's been good here over the last 3 seasons, and I think you do lose some of that without Josh Reynolds, meaning that last season he had 7 targets against man coverage, caught 6 of those targets for 82 yards, earning a 67.6 grade for PFF. Year before, 19 targets against man, 12 receptions for 210 yards, a 72 grade against PFF. And even go back to his first season with the Lions, he had 10 receptions on 15 targets for 118 yards against man coverage. He's statistically been good there, and he typically can separate in those spots. So I'm going to go through some of the plays and some of the notes that I had from kind of just rewatching play. What is he going to bring to the table for the Lions, and how can his role potentially expand for the Lions, and why maybe we shouldn't be overlooking this guy because he's been reliable. The Lions have paid him. They believed in him, and also at the same time, he's a really good player. So we'll start with the hands first. This is an area where I already hit on the numbers. He has good hands. Doesn't drop the ball very often. Now, where I had limited his grade here is the fact that I don't think he's big time in contested situations. He obviously has a lack of catch radius in terms of being just a straight leaper. Even on fade routes, he also can allow guys to kind of get back into play, recover, get their hands into the play. He's not going to box you out at the catch point necessarily and create space. I don't think he uses offhand extremely well, just at the catch point to kind of wall off some space. He's not really built like that. He's obviously on a slimmer side a little bit there. I think he's gotten a little bit bigger since he came out for the draft, but he's not great in those areas. And through contested situations, we haven't always seen the hands be consistent, right? And again, the radius can kind of diminish a little bit. But in terms of not dropping the football, you don't see that very often. He rarely drops the football. He shows soft hands. He also shows very good reactiveness to the football. Underhand technique, the scoop technique is extremely natural. You see it on screens. You see it over in the middle of the field. You see the quick reactiveness kind of in those level 1 little concepts where the ball's going to get on him in a hurry. He's a hand catcher for chest and above catches. He's also fearless, attacking the middle of the field, which is another thing that Brandin Cooks would bring to the table. He brings that fearlessness. We've seen that, and willingness to kind of get up in the air, go airborne over the middle of the field, willingness, understanding that he's going to take a hit after he comes down with the football. So he's shown the ability in terms of just having hands, natural hands, he has those. And he kind of brings some of, to me, that punt return technique to the table in terms of a lot of the underhand pass catching technique because it's so natural. His transition speed is really good in those spots, and it helps him a ton of like screens when the Lions get the ball in his hands quickly, which again, to what I pointed out earlier, Brandin Cooks, one of his 3 highest pass rating route concepts was on screens. And if you look at Kalif Raymond over the last few years on screen passes, last season, 9 targets, 9 receptions, 104 yards. Year before that, 12 receptions, 12 targets. For that, 7 receptions on 8 targets. I know it's a screen, so it's a little bit weird, but we know Kalif Raymond has been a big part on screens for Lions. So he has good tracking ability. He paces himself well to the football, typically can get himself aligned, and he also plays with really nice tracking speed as well. Again, I think he could just do a better job at sometimes pulling himself back to the ball, carving out a little bit more space at the catch point, and he just has some natural limitations there as well. When you talk about separation ability, so as I said, I've always been enamored with his ability to just simply separate. Just watching his all-22, just watch him not catch the ball, and you're always like, man, he just seems like he's open all the time. And I understand in a way that can kind of happen with smaller receivers because they're so quick, but he does he creates a lot of separation, and I think a lot of ways that add consistency to his game, but also still allows him to be such a consistent high catch rate, high usage player for the Lions, where when you throw it to him again, a lot of times good things are happening. You're not throwing it to him with a 70 pass rating. Usually when you're throwing it his way, it's because he's open. He's usually going to come down with the football. And when you look at it for separation, he has the ability to open up all levels of the field. For one routes, you see the footwork there. He's been very successful when you got him in stacks. You've worked him in those combo route situations. I think he's very impactful, like when he's lined up with running backs and he has some of the speed next to him there, like Jahmyr Gibbs. He's worked really well off of those guys. He also brings that route running to the table, that discipline, that pacing, understanding when to press the gas, understanding, do I need to push hard vertically? Am I trying to sell something underneath to kind of pull a defender out of the play? Do I need to allow it to set up before I take off? He has a really nice feel for that. I think overall what you see with Kalif Raymond, the 2 things that stand out is awareness and crisp. Those are the 2 things that stands out as a route runner. He runs with that crisp detail and a lot of awareness. Okay, coverage moves. He's aware of it. He identifies it, he reacts sitting down in zone holes, adapting to man coverage, half-turn coverage, things are moving defensively, high awareness, you even see it in the press release, but then also very crisp in how he does his route running as well. Routes like dig routes, for example, where I don't think that he'll be maybe as dynamic as a guy like Cooks was at times with the LA Rams, and that's an area where, again, that's Jameson Williams. This is where you got to step up for us, right? You got to add more in this area for us. That's where Sam Laporte is going to live. James Mitchell can live in that area, but that's also Donovan Peoples-Jones. That's his wheelhouse, right? That's not necessarily Kalif Raymond consistently. Not to say he can't always separate here. He has the ability to make really deep sinks, turns at the top of the route, double moves. He has really good ability to separate in those spots, but consistently holding separation, especially when he's not kind of breaking it in and then out with the timing, or if a speed out or just a pure dig route, you don't always see some of that separation that he's able to maintain in those spots. And then again, always finishing through traffic isn't going to be a strength, so he can lose some separation in those spots.
Like, for example, dig routes, I don't think he's as great at just sticking, planning, and then striding out of breaks and being able to really create that separation through that. Instead, it's the short area quickness. Again, we'll talk about some of this motion stuff. I think he's a little bit tight at times, feel like it's in the hips, so you get like these extra steps trying to kind of flip directions or flip back to the football, looking back to the ball on hitch routes.
But you do see the plant and stick with steep angles. We see it against Dallas. He also opens that up on level 3, the consistency at which he separates on the deep post, which again is where Brandin Cooks was super successful. And if you look at it statistically, Kalif Raymond, with a pretty small sample size, I mean, he's not getting 112 targets like Cooks got in 2018. Yet he's still, in 2022, he's still 30th in terms of reception on 20-plus yard targets with 6. If he's getting, instead of in 2022, 60 targets, if he's getting 120 targets, let's just say that number, just to say it doubles, and he's getting 12 receptions on 20 plus. Now all of a sudden he's in a whole different category. How we're looking at Kalif Raymond, I don't think he'll get there, but I think that's just important to keep in mind. Is in terms of the percentage, that's a strong percentage for Kalif Raymond. He's consistently separating in those spots where when you watch his ability to set up double moves, the crispness at the top of the route in those spots, he has success running away from coverage consistently. So you just talk about crossers. This is where, again, without Jameson Williams, right? If you don't have Jamo for a game, who can add kind of that element of just pure speed? He brings that. For me, he's less of a strider than Jameson that's going to continuously separate as the play rolls on. So it's a little bit more leaning into kind of the cuts, the sinks, separating in and out of breaks, and being able to quickly get up to speed. That's where he separates, rather than just like run him vertically and let him continue to separate. Like, he's not getting that because he doesn't stride out of his routes necessarily. He gets up to speed, though, a lot faster, and that's where the acceleration comes into play.
I believe Kalif posted an unofficial 1-4-8 10-yard split coming out for the draft, which is insane. But you can see on here, it's even that football intelligence when he's pressing, that discipline. As soon as the cornerback open up, stick it, get upfield on the play. I mean, it's all about that timing to not allow the cornerback to stick with
the
it.
ability to open up very complex routes. So whip routes, level 1, the consistency of which he creates separation comes back to the foot quickness. It also comes back to the foot polish and the burst out of his breaks, how quickly he can get up to speed in those spots. I feel like at times I feel a little bit of tightness when I watch him a little bit. It's not as loose. It's not as much shake or as agile. So at times you'll feel like it kind of gets like a few extra steps to round it or really sink in through routes and lean through routes. But you do get that foot quickness to work a lot of complex routes, specifically on level 1 route. He has that ability to get flat with ease. Deep out routes, think of the comeback routes, his ability to get flat back to the football, right? That ability to get flat at the top of the route. It's also such a big impact of pass motion that they utilize him on for on the snap to turn the corner, push vertically, attack cornerback's blind spot, and then work off that. How much success have we seen with Kalif Raymond in those areas? And that's a huge element of that as well, is that ability to get flat at the top of the route that shows up in those spots as well. I think he lacks some nuance in terms of consistently changing pace, especially pressing at the top of the route to always push cornerbacks off their spot or force them to open up. Instead, then he starts to kind of play through traffic unnecessarily. But again, even comeback routes, you see the polish within that route running. And then after the catch, he's effective. I don't think he's elite after the catch. I don't think he's consistently a home run threat after the catch. And again, I don't think he's the most agile or shifty after the catch either. Also, I think he's a little bit more reactive than creative. He is effective here because he has a very quick transition ability, plays with awareness immediately off the catch of where kind of the hole is in the coverage so he can knife upfield immediately. And I think, again, he gets a little bit tight when it's like I'm looking back to the ball to make the grab, being able to flip myself around, then get upfield. Like so on a hitch route, being able to actually create yards at the catch, that always feels limited. Finding the balance there, finding the sink and the bend to do that. But he does play with the feel where it's like I can kind of lean into the opening, and as soon as I get the football, we saw it against the LA Rams in 2021, and he's taking off. He does play with consistent awareness in spots like that, and that acceleration as soon as the ball gets in his hand. Ability to slam on the brakes in space while also being able to create sharp cuts just really easily. Again, not necessarily the best contact balance, though he will fight, and he will fight forward for first downs. I think it shows up as a blocker. When you just see some of the clips of him blocking, like one of the things that I loved about Kalif, and it was like so random, but like let's say the offense turned the ball over, he was always running back to try to get into the play. Even when the ball was there, oh, here's a sack. He's racing back to the quarterback to go pick him up. Like, you always felt like you saw that with Kalif Raymond. Like, he was going to play through he didn't get the football, but he was never disappointed. He didn't ever show the emotion. It was like, I'm racing back. And he was just consistently racing back to the quarterback. Oh, the ball's out. Let me get back in the play. Like, there was never like a frustration feel with him on the field where it's like he was down and he had his head down. It was still like, I gotta go get the football. He always had that mentality. I think it showed up as a blocker, his willingness, but also his success. We give so much credit to St. Brown here. We must also give credit to Kalif Raymond and what he does as a blocker. And I think that shows up in his fight that he has for the first down. His contact balance and like playing through contact and being able to maintain speed, I don't think is ideal necessarily either. I think he does lose a lot of kind of burst when he gets contact after the football gets in his hands. We've all seen how dynamic he is as a punt returner, and he's actually been really good there because he is decisive. He'll get upfield, he's quick, and he gets up to speed very quickly. So you make a wrong angle on this guy, and he's absolutely gone. This is where I think he's a little bit limited. Release. Another scenario, they kind of move Cooks in and out, like on the line, off the line. I think that there's some limitations here. You'll see times where it feels like he's getting held up off the line of scrimmage. I don't think he uses his hands incredibly well in terms of impact, like keeping himself clean. You do see active hands to work himself clean and kind of battle off cornerbacks that are trying to ride his hip, but I don't think they're always as impactful as you would like to see. His footwork to me isn't always explosive in terms of like a single step to really press cornerbacks. It's more so reliant on the footwork and how clean it is, but also the quickness and really the suddenness. But I love the most about his press release is specifically the awareness. It's like, okay, cornerback's playing inside leverage. Let me attack this way. Let me show you that skip step. Let me kind of pace this to then open it up so I can really be sudden, play it, and then get a field and use that quickness off of my release. And then try to kind of duck under the contact and then kind of keep my active hands alive. That way I can try to kind of work myself clean a little bit there. He also carries a lot of that weave from his release into the top of the route, pressing off coverage cornerbacks, pressing zone coverage, opening up other routes consistently. You get a lot of the awareness and just the feel of the FBI. And again, he also brings that kind of fast motion element, which he's been very impactful for the Lions in that spot. I think his route strength pops up as well as a little bit of an issue here. Again, kind of like with the ball in his hands, slows down his route. You'll see him get rerouted a little bit. he kind of struggles, I think, at times to deal with that. So it's kind of hit and miss in terms of getting off the line of scrimmage.
One thing that I do hate personally is his inability to consistently maintain his stack that he can create early, especially against man coverage. Well, he'll allow cornerbacks to recover or undercut his routes. He doesn't really put him on his hip or continue to create that separation. I think some of that's from the lack of striding, but I do not like how he kind of gives up some of the stack that he creates early.
He doesn't carry the most shake or agility either, where he's really going to like be elusive off the line of scrimmage or really sell something inside and being able to shake out of the play. It's more about the suddenness, I think, that he brings off the line of scrimmage. That being said, though, we just pull back to being a route runner, and to me, this is really where it's just so important. It's like, yo, can you run routes to consistently get open? And I think this speaks to the efficiency when the ball is thrown his way is where he's good at, which is route running. I think this is where it comes into play. Disciplined vertical push, whether that's a level 3 route, level 1 route, level 2, very disciplined pushing vertically, eye discipline, pumping his arms, not necessarily giving the tell that he's about to sink. He's super sudden into kind of those deep curl routes where you just don't expect it, and then boom, it's like on you, and he's right back to the football. Very sudden there. You'll see with comeback routes, he does utilize that offhand through the top of the routes. I wasn't expecting this with a guy at this size utilizing, and this is why I know J-Mo can do it, being able to utilize into route breaks, kind of lean into contact and create separation off on like the deep out routes. That's something you'd expect from a bigger receiver that's just, naturally just trying to bully somebody. He does this at his side. He kind of leans into guys, creates separation, attacking off coverage, attacking the blind spot specifically. Then also the awareness. You'll see it on like stacks or on combo routes out here against the Jets, and you kind of just see the vision where he kind of just waits for the cornerback to open up. He's setting up that timing before he goes into his route. You just see that awareness when you watch him play, which opens up so much flexibility where he can also play on the field for the Lions. And I thought that was a huge thing that they lost with Josh, was just football intelligence and route runner. You definitely have a lot of that here with Kalif Raymond that can't be underestimated because it does add so much flexibility. It's like we can really put him anywhere, and he's going to know what to do. And he's usually going to time things up. He's also going to help other players get open as well. But play with disciplined footwork like we see on the slants, for example. I think he loses discipline. I think he plays with discipline through like slants and kind of the footwork, working through some of the speed routes. Though I don't think it's always the most impactful. And I think at times he can break discipline early in speed routes. Again, you'll see this on dig routes where his eyes will start to kind of peek inside versus holding that discipline upfield necessarily. And guys can get a little bit of a key on when he's going to kind of break off his route. He's much more sudden when we start to kind of pull that element away. Now I think he becomes a little bit less impactful, but he does a great job dialing down into zone coverage, feeling upcoming defenders, hitting landmarks consistently. This guy is the definition of being on time. And again, this is where, like, look at this. This is Brandin Cooks running a post route off the play action versus basically Kalif Raymond doing the exact same thing, right? Fighting himself clean, breaking the post route on time. As soon as he said that break, ball's out, and boom, it's right on him. And this guy is like the definition of he's hitting his spot when he's supposed to be there, hitting his landmarks on time. That is what thrives with golf, and that leads to the efficiency because he's a good separator, he's a good pass catcher, he's fearless, and he is super consistent at hitting his landmarks on a time. So that's what you get, and it adds so much value to everywhere that he can be on the field. Raymond adds to the table is he's just a pure team player, and to me, that's why a guy like this gets paid as early as he did, because you just know exactly what you're going to get. You know that he's going to be reliable for your team. To me, I didn't want to make that comparison to Brandin Cooks because I don't feel like he is. I don't think he'll ever be able to put up that production because I think he's just got a little bit, in some ways, a little bit limited route tree in terms of where you'd want him to run routes because of success. I don't think maybe he's always as physically imposing or as explosive where it's like you're going to consistently get great results if you ask him to do these certain things. If you just boiled it down to Josh Reynolds versus Kalif Raymond, the reason that you go with a guy like Kalif Raymond is because, again, it creates clarity. When you have Josh Reynolds, a little bit less clarity in certain spots who's going to play what role. When you have Kalif Raymond, it's clear. Doesn't need to be a starter. Can be a backup inside or outside. But J-Mo, your role is to be there for the number 2. You become that guy. Your role really is as huge as you want to make it, right? You show that you can be very versatile, run a huge, diverse route tree. You consistently come down the football. You consistently get open. You dial in certain routes like we talked about in another video. The sky's the limit for you. St. Brown, you're the one. Sam Laporte is going to eat. I would just say don't overlook Kalif Raymond because I'm not going to sit here and say that I'm predicting he's going to go 800 yards. I wouldn't predict that because it would take other things, I think, happening for that to happen. I think J-Mo's going to have a big year. So I can't go out and actually say that I think that will happen because I think Gibbs is going to have more usage in the pass game. I think Vaki adds elements there. I think, again, it's going to lean into Laporta, Saint, J-Mo. You guys are the guys. It's clear. Like, let's go. You guys are the group. But don't overlook Kalif Raymond because I think he actually adds the flexibility for this offense in the sense of how they can build this thing going forward. And there's a reason they locked him up through 2025 and not 2024. They locked him up through 2025 because they know that he adds that security to this offense, and the roles are there to be earned. Peoples-Jones, Antoine Green, you have different skill sets. You can battle for spots. If you can get vertical, you can do some things as catch. Peoples-Jones, he's physical. He's a different style. But Kalif adds kind of everything else to the table where it's like now you guys can work into those roles, and Kalif is that really reliable security blanket that you just have on the roster that is going to get the job done if he's asked upon. The guy has just gotten better and better, and to me, he's a really good football player. Simple as that. So overall, I thought we'd just take some time to talk about Kalif today. I felt like this was necessary. So, and if you just look back at Brandin Cook's games and just going through his route tree, I think there's a lot of similarities in what we've seen just in a larger sample size to Kalif Raymond. So again, to me, I always use the Jameson Williams comparison there, but I think it's worth saying that, when healthy, if the pass protection is there, which is what the Lions continue to invest in, and you have the guy that's going to eat up receptions in St. Brown, you obviously have the guy that's the vertical imposing threat, that's the guy that's going to move people in Jameson Williams, but it also opens that opportunity for Kalif Raymond to be effective in terms of, if you have time in the pocket, the guy's going to get open. He's going to open all three levels. Now, all of a sudden, he becomes very impactful, and what we know is over the last 3 years, he's been extremely efficient. So with that being said, let me know your thoughts, comments below. Thank you for watching, and I'm out.